Sarah sat propped against her pillows, her 4-week-old daughter nestled against her chest, the weight and warmth of the tiny body both a comfort and a reminder of how close she had come to never holding her again. The angry red marks on her arm where the 4 had been were fading, but the memory of that night, the night she nearly died, remained vivid and terrifying. It had started with what seemed like a simple breast infection. At 39, Sarah was no stranger to the complications of childbirth. Her son, now 8, had brought her to the edge of death once before when septicemia had landed her in the ICU. Her oldest, a daughter of 18, had been too young then to understand how close she'd come to losing her mother. But this time, history was threatening to repeat itself with even more devastating consequences. The walk-in clinic doctor had been clear: with her history of sepsis, Sarah was at high risk. If your temperature rises above 38 Celsius, seek help immediately, she had warned, prescribing antibiotics and sending Sarah home with a checklist of symptoms to monitor. Sarah had nodded, clutching her newborn closer, determined to be vigilant, but by nightfall, her body had begun to betray her. The fever came first, 38 degrees and climbing, followed by violent shaking that rattled her teeth. Words slurred and stumbled from her lips like drunken strangers. Her husband, Mark, watched in growing horror as she deteriorated. Barely able to shuffle to the bathroom with his support, her skin burning beneath his fingertips, in their country, protocol dictated calling the medical hotline before heading to the emergency room. A system designed to prevent unnecessary visits and the accompanying hefty charges. Mark made the call, his voice tight with fear as he described his wife's symptoms, her history, the doctor's explicit warnings. The nurse who called back seemed distracted, perhaps overworked, possibly just indifferent. Her questions were perfunctory, focused narrowly on whether Sarah had urinated in the past 12 hours. When Mark confirmed she had, though only with his help, the nurse's dismissal was swift and cutting. "It's not sepsis then," she declared, her tone tinged with irritation. "Take an ibuprofen and monitor the situation." Sarah, drifting in and out of lucidity, heard the exchange through a fog of fever. A small voice within her protested. This wasn't right, something was terribly wrong, but the authority in the nurse's voice silenced her fears. Who was she to question a medical professional? So she swallowed the pill offered by her husband's trembling hand and closed her eyes, trying to ignore the fire consuming her from within. Less than 2 hours later, the situation had become critical. Sarah's temperature had soared to a dangerous 40 Celsius, 104 Fahrenheit. Her consciousness ebbed and flowed like a tide, pulling her further from shore. Vomiting racked her weakened body, and standing had become impossible without immediate collapse. Terror etched itself into Mark's features as he watched his wife slip away. This time, he bypassed the hotline entirely, calling directly for an ambulance. His voice cracked as he pleaded for help, the baby wailing in the background, their son peering fearfully from the doorway, their teenage daughter attempting to calm her siblings while fighting back her own tears. The paramedics arrived to find a family on the brink of tragedy. Their assessment was immediate and alarming. Sarah was extremely ill. Her responses were garbled, her skin mottled, her condition rapidly deteriorating. They moved with urgent efficiency, stabilizing her enough for transport, their concerned glances to each other communicating what they didn't say aloud. This woman might not make it to the hospital. The journey passed in fragments for Sarah. Flashing lights, the wail of sirens, gentle but firm hands, voices that seemed to come from very far away. She was rushed into the resuscitation room upon arrival, a precaution that underscored the gravity of her condition. Fortunately, the most extreme interventions weren't needed, but with the hospital at capacity, she spent the night on a stretcher in a nurse's station, intravenous antibiotics and fluids working to combat the infection raging through her system. The hospital staff treated her with kindness. A stark contrast to the dismissal she'd received hours earlier. When the paramedics who had brought her in stopped by the next day, Sarah didn't recognize them, her memories of the previous night washed away by fever and fear. She apologized profusely for being sick on them, her embarrassment evident even through her weakened state. "It's good to see you looking better," they told her, genuine relief in their voices. They had seen too many cases like hers end differently. Now, days later, still technically in recovery but well enough to be home with her family, Sarah couldn't shake the thought that kept circling in her mind. What if Mark hadn't been there? What if he had trusted the nurse's assessment completely and not called the ambulance? What if she had been alone with her children, unable to advocate for herself as consciousness slipped away? Her country had recently launched a major initiative focused on septicemia awareness. Posters adorned clinic walls, and staff training on recognizing warning signs had been implemented nationwide. Yet despite these efforts, despite her explicit history and symptoms that matched the warning criteria exactly, she had been dismissed, her concerns minimized by the very system meant to protect her. Friends suggested letting it go. Complaints could jeopardize someone's livelihood, they warned. But Sarah couldn't silence the voice that now whispered a different concern. What about the next person? What about the single parent home alone with children, or the elderly person with no advocate, or the child whose symptoms might be brushed aside? If she remained silent, who else might not survive the same dismissal? The question wasn't whether she should speak up. She knew she should. The question was whether speaking up made her the villain in someone else's story, or a necessary voice for those who might not otherwise have one. What would you do in Sarah's situation? Have you ever had to decide between speaking up about medical negligence and staying silent? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below.